Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim helps you master English in depth and detail. Two interesting things happened to me this week. First, I decided to take a small break from my course on verbs and verb tenses. Variety and motivation are both important in language learning, so I started thinking about something new to talk about. The second interesting thing that happened to me this week was that an old student of mine from France came back and started having classes again. He also started listening to Master English with Tim and told me that his favorite episodes have been about phrasal verbs. So, to welcome my old student as a new listener, I decided to make a whole episode on his favorite topic. This week's episode has 13 phrasal verbs, and all of them contain either in or out. For example, take in and take out. Our first phrasal verb is take in, with past form took in. In British English, take in means to make a piece of clothing smaller so that it fits better on the person wearing it. Someone might take in a suit or dress that they've bought to better show the shape of their body. Or someone might take in a shirt or pants after they've lost some weight. Of course, you can't take in all or even most clothes. You can't really take in jeans, for example. It's something that is done only with more formal clothing. I suppose also that nowadays most people don't know how to take in their own clothing, so they pay someone else to do it. Let's move on to the second meaning of take in. When you take in a sick or injured animal, for example, a bird with a broken wing, you bring the animal into your home and try to take care of it. I think most people would agree that taking in a dog or cat from the street is a much better thing to do than buying one from a pet store or private seller. Personally, though, I'm not sure if I would take in an injured animal. When I was a kid, we would sometimes find an injured bird or squirrel and take it in, but sadly they always died, and that made me pretty sad. On the other hand, nowadays we all have better access to information because of the internet, including about animals that we've taken in, so maybe they would survive if I took them in now. Let's go now to our second phrasal verb, take out. Take out is a really good illustration of two important facts about phrasal verbs. The first is that phrasal verbs can have really unpredictable uses or meanings. And the second is that when we change the particle of a phrasal verb to its opposite, the meaning is rarely the opposite of the original verb. For example, the meanings of take in are not antonyms or opposites of the meanings of take out. So, take out has two meanings. The first one is very familiar. You take your wallet out of your pocket, or you take your phone out of your bag, or take a slice of pizza out of a box. The second meaning of take out is pretty surprising. Take out also means to kill an enemy who is causing you inconvenience. You can hear this phrasal verb in mafia movies. The boss of one gang takes out the leader of a rival gang, or a drug dealer might take out one of his employees who is becoming too powerful. You can also hear the military using this phrasal verb. They might take out someone who they say is a terrorist. In all of these examples, take out expresses the idea that the person who is taking out or killing an enemy does not see that enemy as a person, but instead as a practical problem that needs to be solved. Pretty cold-blooded, if you ask me. A very similar meaning of take out is to destroy something or cause it to stop functioning. For example, if two countries start fighting, they might start by trying to take out the other's bridges or to take out their radars. This meaning of take out doesn't have to be about war or violence. For example, a very large tropical storm could take out a city's electricity. Or, more dangerously, that same storm could take out a city's water cleaning system. Okay, let's talk about our third phrasal verb, which is to reel in. Here the word reel is spelled R-E-E-L. E-L. If you want to understand what reel in means, then you need to first understand what the noun reel means. A reel is a physical object made of metal or plastic that has the shape of a cylinder and that is used in two types of machines. The first type of machine where you can find a reel is an old-fashioned camera that uses physical film instead of digital media. A reel of film in the 1990s might contain enough film to take 24 or 36 pictures. A reel of film was about 6 centimeters tall. You could also find reels of film inside of old movie cameras. These reels were, of course, much larger. For example, movie film reels might be 600 meters long. You can also find the word reel on YouTube. The short 1-minute movies you can find on YouTube are called reels, YouTube reels. You might have seen them before. The other place where you can find a reel is on a fishing pole. A fishing pole is a long stick with a thin nylon cable on it that you use to catch fish. The reel on a fishing pole is the cylinder-shaped mechanism that lets more cable out or pulls the cable back in to help you catch your fish. So, back to our phrasal verb, reel in. If you reel someone in, that means that you easily take the person's full attention and then use that attention to make them do what you want. For example, a really interesting and attractive woman can reel in men and decide if she likes them or not. And then, as if the men were fish, she can either keep them or throw them back into the water. I think you can see the connection now between reeling someone in and the sport of fishing. Another type of person who reels people in is a really good salesperson. A good salesperson reels potential buyers in so they have a strong chance at selling something to them. A great public speaker reels in their listeners, often with interesting stories. A good teacher reels his or her students in by making the material easy to understand and at the same time interesting so that they learn the material. I hope I've reeled you in today. Okay, now we're ready for our fourth phrasal verb, which is to crank something out. To understand this phrasal verb, you need to understand what a crank is. A crank is a long, relatively thin piece of non-flexible material, for example, aluminum or steel, that is connected to a rotating axle. So think, for example, of a bicycle. Now think of the pedals that are on a bicycle that you put your feet onto. The part of the bike that is connected to the pedals is called a crank. When you push on the pedals with your feet, the cranks rotate forward. You can also find a much smaller hand crank on a non-electric coffee mill. You put the dry coffee beans into the top of the mill, and as you rotate the crank with your hand, the mill breaks the beans into small pieces. So, what does it mean to crank something out? If you crank something out, you quickly produce a large amount of something. There is one English writer who is famous for cranking out books. Her name was Barbara Cartland, and in 1 year, she cranked out 23 romance novels. During her lifetime, she cranked out 723 books. Of course, programs like ChatGPT will soon probably make 23 books in a year seem rather slow. What are some other things that you can crank out? Well, a lazy person can crank out excuses or reasons for why they don't do any work. An Apple factory in China at one point was cranking out 500,000 iPhones every day. The Indira Gandhi University in India has about 7 million online and in-person students, so they probably crank out about 1 million new graduates every year. A really creative person can crank out recipes for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or workers in a restaurant kitchen might need to crank out hundreds of orders each hour on a Friday night. Let's move on to our fifth phrasal verb, to fall in with. If you fall in with a person or group of people, you begin to communicate or associate with them over a longer period of time. There's an important detail, though. The person that you fall in with is a bad person. For example, you don't want to fall in with a group of heavy drinkers. You definitely don't want to fall in with people who break the law. And generally, you don't want to fall in with negative people. Another detail to note about fall in with is that when you fall in with someone, it does not sound exactly like a decision. It sounds more like something that you allowed to happen, maybe because you didn't understand what was happening, or maybe because you were in a moment in your life when you weren't very strong. This is kind of like when you just fall. You don't decide to fall, gravity makes you fall. And when you fall in with a bad group of people, there also is some kind of gravity or attraction happening. Let's go to our sixth phrasal verb, which is fall out with. If you fall out with a friend, you stop being friends with that person because of a conflict or disagreement that grew over time, usually without you understanding how serious the problem was. Friends can fall out with each other because their priorities are no longer the same. Friends can fall out with each other because one or both of them said some things that made the other person feel angry. People can fall out with each other because their worldviews or political opinions change. Sometimes if you've fallen out with someone, it's possible to repair the friendship, but not always. Let's move on to our seventh phrasal verb, which is break in. When shoes or clothing break in, you wear and use them long enough that they become comfortable to wear. So, you might have bought some leather shoes that you wear to work, and at first they were hard and uncomfortable, but with time and walking, they become softer and more flexible. They break in. You might also need to break in a pair of jeans. You could also break in the seat on a bicycle. Some people also use break-in when talking about new electronic devices. When they first buy, for example, an iPhone after having used Android devices for many years, they need to understand how to use their new phone until using it feels easy and natural. When they do that, they say that they break in their new phone. Let's go to our eighth phrasal verb, break out. It has two meanings. The first one is very easy and is connected with war or conflict. When a war breaks out, it starts. The First World War broke out in 1914. The Second World War broke out in Europe in 1939. Break out has a second meaning. When a person breaks out, a large part of their skin becomes red and irritated. For example, sometimes teenagers' faces can break out because of acne. Or sometimes people break out because they've eaten something that they are allergic to. If you break out because of a food allergy, you really should see a doctor immediately. There are also some plants that can make you break out. In my part of the United States, we have a plant called poison ivy. Poison ivy is a small plant with 3 soft leaves with a small red point in them. When you touch poison ivy, it leaves oil on your skin that makes it break out. Your skin becomes very red and starts to itch very badly. This happened to me when I was about 13. I don't know how it happened or how I touched the poison ivy, but I got poison ivy all over my face, and it was very uncomfortable. My face turned red, it itched terribly, and really disgusting. Some kind of orange oil was coming out of my skin. It was absolutely terrible. It took about 2 weeks for it to go away. I think nowadays a doctor would probably just give me steroids to stop something like that from happening. So I am very careful about poison ivy. When I see it, I just avoid it so that I do not break out again. Let's talk about our ninth phrasal verb, sit in on. This one has a rather narrow and special meaning. When a person sits in on a university course, that means that the person attends the course without paying for it and also without doing any of the work associated with the course. They do this just for fun and education. A person who sits in on a course usually just sits in the back of the class and listens. Sometimes people who sit in on a course ask the professor for permission to do so, but not always. For example, when I was in university, I took a class on Russian history, and there were some leftist anarchist types who sat at the back of the room and listened. At one point, a few new paying students joined the group and needed to take the seats in the back of the room. This was a few weeks after the beginning of the semester. It was at that point that the professor understood that these people at the back of the room were sitting in on his course. The professor didn't mind, and the guests just left. Let's go to our 10th phrasal verb now, which is to blow out. When a business blows out a product, it sells the product for an extremely low price because they want to get rid of it. A shoe store, for example, might blow out shoes that are no longer fashionable, or it might blow out shoes that are either very large or very small. A store that is not profitable and has lost all its money might blow out everything in the store with a 70% discount. I remember working once, for example, in a bike shop that was going out of business, and we blew things out first for 50% off, and then even more. The sale reeled in some people who wanted to buy $1,000 bikes for just $50. It was actually kind of shocking, but totally logical. That's what happens when you blow things out. Let's move on to our 11th phrasal verb, which is turn out. When something turns out to be true, it means that we find out that it's true. For example, hundreds of years ago, people thought that sickness was caused by bad wind or cold. That, of course, wasn't true. It turned out that bacteria and viruses cause sickness. Also, speaking of bacteria and viruses, scientists used to have two types of microscopes, one for looking at bacteria, which were big, and one for looking at viruses, which are much, much smaller generally. Then, in 2010, two French scientists decided to use a microscope which could see things that were between those two sizes. No one had tried this before, and it turned out that there are megaviruses. After that first discovery, many scientists started looking for megaviruses, and it turns out that there are lots of them. It turns out that there are even a few viruses which are bigger than the smallest bacteria. I have one more example of turn out. If it turns out that the person you are dating is your cousin, you should stop dating that person immediately. Let's move on to our 12th and second to last phrasal verb, which is burn out. When a fire burns out, it stops burning because it has burned until there is nothing left which can burn. We can also say that a person at work burns out when they have worked so much that they lose all interest in what they are doing. A person who is burned out no longer has any creativity and might quit at any moment. A person who is burned out does not work very well. I don't want you to burn out, so let me give you the last phrasal verb, the 13th one, which is sleep in. When a person sleeps in, they stay in bed and sleep for a long time instead of waking up early. People sleep in usually for two reasons. First, people sleep in because they worked a lot during the week. Second, people sleep in because they partied for a long time at night. And when you sleep in, you're going to sleep until at minimum 10 o'clock. More often it would be something like 11 or even noon. So, okay, that's all for this week, everyone. Thanks for listening, and see you next Monday. And before I leave, please, if you can, if you're listening on Spotify, please leave me a nice review. And the same is true on Apple Podcasts. If you can leave a nice review there, that would really help the podcast. It helps me so much. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk next Monday.